They laughed at her the day she showed up at the army recruitment camp with dust on her face and holes in her sandals. A skinny girl from a forgotten village, with a name nobody remembered, and eyes that had seen more than her age should allow. While others wore ironed shirts and boots, she stood there in a hand-stitched salwar, carrying her late father's water flask like it was a badge of honor. Her name was Zahara. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her silence irritated the loud recruits, especially the ones who believed the army was no place for girls, especially not ones who'd grown up herding goats on hills and washing clothes by the river. She won't last a week, one boy joked. She'll faint the moment she hears a gunshot, said another. Even the instructors weren't sure what to do with her, but she stood in the line anyway, her back straight, her hands steady, and somehow she passed. The training was brutal. The days started before sunrise. The runs were endless, and the punishments came faster than the wind. Zahara never complained. When the boys faked injuries to skip drills, she kept going. When it rained, she trained barefoot. When the others whispered about her behind her back, she just stared at the hilltop like it had the answers. No one noticed, but she tied her boots tighter every time someone said she didn't belong. Weeks passed. Her silence became normal. Her strength became noticeable. But the respect never came. Not from her seniors, not from her unit, and definitely not from the man she was about to carry through a war zone. Because on the day it all changed, General Dauda himself had visited the border post where Zahara had been posted as part of a relief unit. He was a towering man, the kind of leader whose name alone made enemies retreat. He didn't notice her when he stepped off the jeep. Why would he? She was just part of the background. A quiet girl who folded her bed perfectly and polished her boots without being told. That morning the air felt strange. The wind carried more dust than usual. Zahara felt it before she saw it. Something was wrong. She tried to tell her squad leader that the birds weren't flying right, that the air had gone still too suddenly, but he brushed her off. "You're not in the village anymore," he said. "Stop chasing shadows." But by noon, the shadows weren't just in her head. They came over the ridge, armed, organized, and fast. An ambush. The camp exploded into panic. Soldiers scrambled for weapons. Orders shouted over each other. The general was still inside the command tent going over maps. Zahara saw the first burst of smoke, then the second, and before anyone else could react, she was already moving. Bullets rained down like hail. Trucks caught fire. Men shouted into radios that weren't responding. The soldiers who once laughed at Zahara were now crawling for cover, some frozen in place, others injured. She ducked, rolled behind a broken wall, and ran straight into the chaos. And there, through the broken frame of the burning supply tent, she saw him. General Dauda, bleeding from the leg, pinned beneath a fallen beam. There was no one else around him. No guards, no backup, no time. He tried to lift the beam, but it was too heavy. Smoke filled his lungs. He coughed once, twice, then leaned back, ready to pass out. That's when Zahara reached him. He looked at her, confused. For a second, he didn't even recognize her. "You," he muttered. "What are you doing here?" She didn't answer. She just grabbed the edge of the beam and pulled. It took all her strength. Her fingers burned. Her legs shook. But she got it off. Then she crouched down, placed one hand behind his shoulder and the other beneath his knees. He whispered, "No, girl. Don't. You'll never make it." But Zahara had already lifted him onto her back. She stood and began to run. Through gunfire. Through smoke. Through screams and explosions. A girl from the hills with dust in her eyes and strength no one believed she had was now carrying the most powerful man in the region. On her back. The enemy saw them. They aimed. But the dust covered her like a shield. She zigzagged between broken buildings, her breath short, heart pounding, never stopping. At one point a soldier yelled her name, but it wasn't in mockery anymore, it was in shock. "Zahara's got the general," he shouted. Another soldier dropped his weapon. "She's what?" By the time she reached the medic station, The general was slipping in and out of consciousness. Blood stained her back. Her knees gave out just outside the tent and she collapsed beside him. But not once did she cry. Not once did she let him fall. The moment the general opened his eyes again, safe and stable, the first thing he asked wasn't about his team. He asked, "Where's the girl?" But Zahara was already gone, back on her feet, back helping others, because, in her eyes, it was never about glory. It was about finishing the mission. The same boys who once joked about her were now asking, "Did you see what she did?" The same commander who ignored her warnings was now saying, "She saved the whole post." And the same general who didn't remember her name was now asking the entire army to never forget it. But this was only the beginning. Because what happened the next day would shake the entire military. And the world would soon know why that village girl didn't just carry the general. She carried a message no one could ignore. The next morning, Zahara sat on a rock behind the field tents, silently wrapping a cloth around her blistered palms. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder, her ankle slightly swollen, but she hadn't complained. Around her, the camp was quiet, too quiet. The attack had shaken everyone. Some soldiers hadn't slept. Others hadn't stopped talking about what they saw. No one could believe it. The girl they all thought wouldn't last a week had carried the most decorated man in the entire region on her back like a child being taken home from school. Inside the command center, General Dauda was awake. His leg was bandaged and the doctor said he'd be on crutches for at least 3 weeks. But he didn't care. He was focused on one thing, finding the girl, not to thank her. That would have been simple. He wanted to know why. Why she ran into the fire when even trained men hesitated. Why she noticed the enemy build up before anyone else. Why she moved like she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. He sent a junior officer to call her in. When Zahara stepped into the tent, she didn't salute. She just stood calm and unreadable. The general looked at her for a few seconds and then said, "Where did you learn to carry weight like that?" Zahara shrugged. "In the village, I used to carry my sick uncle to the river every week." He smiled faintly, but his eyes were serious. "You didn't just carry me. You saved the entire southern unit. If I'd died, the chain of command would have broken and the enemy would have taken the post." Zahara didn't speak. The silence made the general shift in his chair. "You disobeyed orders," he added. "You left your position." "I wasn't given one," she replied quietly. "They never saw me as useful." That sentence stayed with him. Outside, rumors had started spreading. A few soldiers were angry, not at Zahara, but at themselves. Some were embarrassed. One officer, Sergeant Luma, who had mocked Zahara for weeks, now felt humiliated. In front of his team, he had said, "This is bad for morale. One girl becoming the face of bravery while the rest of us froze. They'll laugh at us in every barrack." But Zahara didn't want fame. She stayed back. She helped clean the blood from the clinic floor. She folded stretchers, lifted crates, and volunteered for night patrol, things most people avoided. The only time she was truly alone was when she sat by the campfire with her late father's flask, gently rubbing the metal cap with her thumb. Back home, her village heard the news. People who once said, "She's wasting her life," now whispered her name with pride. Her mother cried alone in the dark, hugging a photo Zahara left behind. Meanwhile, the army headquarters issued a notice. Zahara was being called in for a medal ceremony, a formal recognition before the regional command. But not everyone was happy. Some within the ranks felt threatened. They believed Zahara's story was being used to shift attention from tactical mistakes during the ambush. One officer quietly reached out to the media, framing the situation as a lucky accident exaggerated into heroism. It started to work. Headlines appeared online. General was carried by low-ranking recruit, but was it safe? Army covers operational failure with heroic spin. The noise got louder. General Dauda, now walking with a cane, stepped up. In an internal meeting, he said, "This isn't about spin. This is about what happens when someone listens to instinct over ego. I would have died if not for her. That's the truth. But Zahara, she had already made a decision. She declined the medal. She wrote a short note. If people will only see my worth when I'm holding someone on my back, then I'll go where I'm needed, not where I'm watched. She left it on her cot. Packed her bag. Walked out of the post before sunrise. No ceremony, no interviews. Just a girl walking barefoot again, back toward the hills she came from. But she didn't disappear. Because a week later, a flash flood hit a remote village near the border. The military was too far to respond in time. People said roads were blocked, bridges were gone. But someone reached before them. Zahara. She led families to higher ground, broke through stuck doors, built a temporary rope line across the broken stream using only a belt, tree roots, and a stick. She stayed until every child was safe. Only after that did she send a message to the army. It was just 4 words. This is my post. And then she vanished into the forest again. Back at Army HQ, General Dauda looked at the message and smiled. He turned to his new cadets and said, "If you ever forget what courage looks like, remember the girl they all laughed at. The one who didn't wear medals but carried people instead." But this wasn't the end. Because months later, when war would reach their gates again and when commanders froze in confusion, someone would whisper, "Call Zahara," and the soldiers would nod, because by then, she wasn't just a name anymore. She was a legend. The girl who didn't wait for permission to save lives, the one who showed the world what true strength looks like, quiet, steady, and unstoppable. 6 months passed. Most people thought Zahara had disappeared for good. Some believed she had gone deep into the mountains to live like her ancestors. Others whispered that maybe the army had forced her out quietly, too ashamed to admit a village girl had outshone seasoned soldiers. But deep in the borderlands, where patrols rarely reached and maps lost meaning, Zahara was moving silently, helping villagers, training orphaned kids to survive, building makeshift warning systems using cans and stones. She had become something between a ghost and a guardian. No uniform, no medals, just purpose. Back at the regional base, a new threat was building. A rogue militia had taken control of several key outposts in the eastern zone. They were better armed, better organized, and knew every weak spot in the army's border defense. Commanders scrambled for strategy. Generals debated air support. But in private, one question kept surfacing in quiet rooms. What if we called Zahara? Some said it was madness. She wasn't even enlisted anymore. No official title, no rank. But General Dauda had seen enough war to know that titles don't win battles. People do. One morning, without any ceremony, a single unmarked jeep rolled out of HQ carrying nothing but food rations, a radio, and a small note addressed simply, "If you're out there, we need you." 3 days passed. Then on the 4th night, a voice crackled over an old military frequency that hadn't been used in months. It was clear, calm, familiar. "I'm listening." And just like that, Zahara was back. But this time, she didn't return alone. With her came a dozen young fighters, orphans she had trained, villagers who believed in her, and elders who once taught her survival when she was just a child carrying firewood in the hills. She didn't ask for orders. She asked for maps. Within 48 hours, Zahara had mapped out the militia's pattern of movement better than the intel team. She knew the terrain like a second skin. Where the enemy saw rough rocks, Zahara saw cover. Where they saw forest, she saw traps. The army handed her a unit, not because of protocol, but because no one else could lead it. The final mission was risky. The rogue group had taken a school hostage. Dozens of children were trapped inside. Airstrikes were off the table. Every minute counted. Commanders argued about tactics, but Zahara simply said, "We walk in, we walk out. No child left behind." That night, under the cover of fog, she moved like a whisper through the trees. Her unit spread out in perfect silence. They reached the perimeter without alerting a single guard. And then, everything happened in under 5 minutes. One door burst open. Flashlights went out. Zahara stepped in. She didn't shoot, she didn't shout. She pointed to the children, wide-eyed and shaking, and said only one word. Follow. They did. The guards outside didn't even know what happened until it was too late. When backup finally arrived, they found the hostages already secured near the West Trail, guarded by villagers with hand tools and Zahara's team of barefoot defenders. Not a single child was harmed. The next morning, the front page of every newspaper carried the same headline: Unknown Unit Rescues 42 Children, led by woman with no rank. The photo beneath it wasn't a staged army portrait. It was Zahara sitting on a rock, handing water to a boy who had cried himself to sleep in her lap. No guns, no glory, just care. Back at headquarters, General Dauda looked at the report and quietly smiled. She didn't need the army, he said. The army needed her. Eventually, Zahara was offered everything: medals, promotions, even a permanent command post. But she refused. She left again. Not because she didn't want the recognition, but because her mission was never about applause. It was always about people. And so the legend of the village girl who carried the general on her back only grew stronger. She became the story young recruits were told during training. Her name was written into the code of honor, not as an officer, but as a reminder that courage doesn't wear badges. It walks quietly, acts selflessly, and never waits for permission to do what's right. Because sometimes the ones they laugh at are the very ones who rise when the world needs saving. And Zahara, she didn't just carry a man that day. She carried an entire generation's belief that one girl can be stronger than a whole army, and that is something no one will ever forget.